the possibility that the felt sense of your own internal body wisdom can also offer you a guide to how you're feeling, what seems right, and can suggest some direction when you listen to it. And that, in fact, is going to be the basis of what I talk with you about today, and it's the basis of my work in somatic studies. Somatic studies, very briefly, is the scholarly exploration and research around understanding the lived experience of the body as an essential component in understanding what it means to be human. It's a territory, like many other territories, that I think has been marginalized and ignored, and in some parts of the world and in some phases of our collective history, vilified. And one of the things that I'm really excited about being here at Pacifica to do is to help infuse within the culture, through all of you as prospective students and perhaps eventual graduates, the idea that part of the task of tending the soul of the world also includes this idea of reconnecting with the body as a way to find the soul in the world. Yeah? Okay, so that's me and that's somatic studies in a little nutshell. Specifically, what I want to talk with you about this morning is a piece of work called Elemental Movement. I want to give you some background. As I said, I developed this starting off about 15 years ago, and at that point in time, I was working primarily in private practice and in agency settings, working with homeless youth, also working in an addiction treatment center as a somatic psychotherapist, as a movement therapist. And I was working very much with people who identified within the LGBT community, and also with individuals who had experienced some form of trauma. A lot of that trauma was what I might understand as developmental and as social. A lot of them had histories where they were experiencing oppression, and oppression continued to figure very strongly and largely in their lives. And because I understand oppression as a form of trauma, we were working together to try to resolve some of the lingering effects of their life experiences and to give them the resources that they needed to change how they felt in their bodies so that they could change how they were in the world. And I was encountering a particular clinical struggle, as I think psychotherapists and counselors often do, which is you come across this thing that your clients are doing or failing to do or finding themselves unable to do, and you don't really have a tool in your toolkit to help them with it. And I was finding that in helping the clients that I was working with find safe ways to experience and to access their emotions. As a somatic practitioner, I understood emotions as not things that happen cognitively, but actually sensory and kinesthetic patterns that occur in our body and that we learn to recognize as anger, fear, sadness, whatever. And I was having no success in trying to make it safe for the individuals that I was working with to actually touch into their emotional lives. They were shut down, they were disconnected, and they felt really unsafe. Every time I said, do you think that might be like some anger, and would you like to, just have a little taste of what that might feel like? I said, no. So that's my background. I was also, in trying to figure out strategies for helping my clients with this, of course, very mindful that whatever strategies I might develop, that they really needed to be sensitive to and attentive to cross-cultural and marginalized experience. Not only is that figural and central in my own life and in my own history, it was really front and center for the men and women that I was working with. Concurrently, sort of in this little parallel path that I did that I didn't realize was important, I was also doing a little bit of work around my own cultural history and exploring pagan and Celtic traditions and rituals. And infused throughout that body of work and throughout that history, this motif kept emerging for me of the elements and working with the elements. I was reading Starhawk, her work on the spiral dance, and I was reading Feminist Therapy that was looking at how we reclaim traditions of our own history by making them alive again in our own work. And I went, I wonder if you could move the elements. I wonder if there's a pattern in the way the elements interact that might be useful. And when I say elements, I mean the traditional, very cross-cultural, and I'll get to this in a minute, I understand alchemical set of properties that we understand as earth, water, air, fire, and ether. So through a process of trial and error and a lot of reading and talking to my clients and having conversations with colleagues, I developed what came to be the theoretical foundations for my practice of elemental movement. And here are two key, really distilled concepts. One is that throughout history and across cultures, alchemy has been understood as a model for personal but also external transformation. That by engaging in a detailed, intentional, and rigorous process, that it's possible to change one thing, one ordinary, mundane thing, into something extraordinary. That it's possible to refine and combine and distill and bring to life a set of properties that when you're done are very different, both in your experience and in the world, than what you began with. And coming from my own particular place as a somatic practitioner, I also understood the body as the crucible, as the forum for that potential transformation. The more I studied, the more I worked, the more I realized that I had not come to this first, and what my task really was to find a way of making it accessible and relevant to the clients that I was working with. Some other ideas that those of you who have done some reading or have some experience in depth psychology was that I began to recognize the elements as archetypes. And part of the reason that they held such appeal and became so effective in the work that I was doing with clients was that they were non-human. They didn't have a gender. They didn't have a history or a set of implications that my clients who were survivors of trauma, mostly relational trauma, could project upon. They had a sort of a non-human purity that actually turned out to make them more accessible to a lot of the people that I was working with. I also drew on this idea of movement and moving in a way that's improvised, moving in a way that just allows your body to express what's inside. That was a form of active imagination as Jung understood it. That is a process that you can engage with that allows your body, mind, psyche to develop in ways that make it more integrated and more widely developed. Also, more true to itself. So I thought, okay, so on the depth psychological level, on this level of psyche and soul, I could look at this process as one of individuation, and I could use these elements as a way of working with clients so that they could begin to reintegrate in a meaningful way those disowned and dissociated parts of themselves, including, most specifically, their emotional lives. Yeah? Okay. here's the process that I came up with. I'm going to run through it briefly just so that you've got a sense of what, a little bit of what it looked like, and then we're going to do a little bit. I wanted to start the process out in a way that gave those individuals I was working with a very gentle, safe way in. And so we begin in elemental movement with reflection. Not expressing, not charging, but just, I wonder what this might be if I were going to get anywhere near it. Which is where a lot of my clients really did need to start. But through that process of sitting alongside something that they wanted to explore and allowing themselves to take it in a very gradual, very safe, very gentle way, I found that they became less afraid, less reluctant, and more willing to befriend these experiences that were constellated within an element that we were calling earth, or we were calling fire. From there we moved to activation, which was not just sitting alongside something, but actually feeling what it might be like to step into it and allow those qualities, whatever they were, to actually be felt in the body. And we'll do it in a minute or so, a little example of that. But just to give you an idea of what I meant, in the activation phase, if you felt fiery in your body, what might that be like? And where in your body might you feel connected to fire? And going to the next place, what would fire in your body on a body level inspire you to do outside your body on an expression level? How might fire move if your body were full of fire? What would that look like to somebody else? And this was a really key piece, I think, in large part because so many of the people that I was working with, their trauma, their experiences of oppression were very much related to being with other people, and that other people weren't safe entities. That to doing elemental movement in a group setting meant that at some point when all of the participants were safe with feeling it and expressing it, then we moved to interaction, to actually being in those elements and letting them move through us and allowing ourselves to be with other people who were also doing it. And integration happens as a result of all four of those, and in the practice of elemental movement, also as a result of sitting down after the movement experience, after dancing fire, after breathing air, after rooting into earth. Also sitting down and reflecting on that in yourself, for yourself, and with other people, and hearing how these elements were embodied and experienced by the people you were with.